Boom, we are live. Welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. I know that everyone's probably watching the World Cup soccer at the moment. I have also been watching it. So yeah, England, Panama. I guess you, hopefully, if you are watching that, you can watch this at the same time. And if you can't, don't worry. Yeah, it's actually interesting for the people in the United States. I guess you guys are probably aware. I think Panama is the country that eliminated the US. So as much as you wish the US was in the World Cup, Panama is getting kind of creamed. So perhaps it was for the best. Boom indeed, Phoenix 787. Hey Lauren Sakai, good to see you. Kimmy Kim, C from Berkeley, Sergeant Bilko, good to see you all. First thing, updates on MyChan TV. There are updates being done at the moment. Still these bugs, the same ones we've been trying to get out. The ones with just not refreshing the playlist unless you do it manually, just the first load that you have to refresh the the subscriptions yourself and stuff like that. Oh, Panama, they got one. Well, there we go, that was nice. Yeah, these things we're working, they're urgent things I've been trying to fix, because for me that's when it's done, and once that's done, we can make the full version of the site and talk about making an app, but it's still being worked on, so I'm hoping any day now. So yes, that's what's happening with the site. Yeah, really good to see you all here. I'm guessing it's probably going to pick up in about 15 minutes time. Of course, the other game coming up tonight, if you're watching the World Cup soccer, I call it soccer. I'm from New Zealand. In England it was originally called soccer as well. Football was actually used and associated with rugby before it was associated with soccer. But I do rightfully acknowledge that football is probably the most appropriate name for soccer, but there we go. But it's soccer in Japanese as well, so that's why I call it that. But yes, of course, Japan playing Senegal at its second game later tonight. Maybe that's the first thing I should talk about. The game last week, of course, Japan won its game against Colombia. Yeah, apparently one of the defenders mistook that he was the goalkeeper in the first 3 minutes. Although given the history of Colombian players screwing up enormously at World Cups, I don't feel good for the guy at all. I feel terrible for the person who's in that position, but good for Japan. Of course, had a bit of a leg up on that game. Senegal's going to be a really interesting match for them, actually. Ranking wise, they've got some great players. So, but of course, if Japan wins the game tonight, which will start 30 minutes after the end of this show, that means that Japan should be confirmed to go through to the second round, which I think they did in 2002 in the World Cup. That was actually in Japan, but they didn't go beyond the quarter final, or the one, whatever they call it before that, the pre-quarter or whatever. But yeah, it'd be good to see Japan go forward. I haven't really been following the football so much, but I am one of these people, probably a bit like Americans. I do quite like watching the World Cup. So there we go. The J-Vlog, good to see you. You're exhausted. You scored 12 new private lessons for this week. Well, I understand it. It's a bit like winning a pie eating contest, and the prize is that you then have to finish eating all of the pies. But still, congratulations. I know you're making a living from it all. Hey, good to see, by the way. Oh, and indeed, I now understand the 7 thing. Can I fit it in the screen? Yes, I can, except it goes the other way, but that's okay. Kang and Kodos, also good to see you. Awesome that you didn't fall asleep this week. That's not awesome. You didn't fall asleep this week. That's like 7 days. You should be going to hospital. Oh my god. I hope you're okay, Kang and Kodos. Or you mean for tonight, for this show. In that case, indeed awesome that you're not asleep. Yeah, something like 60% of viewers actually think that the show is better watched while awake. Yeah, still working on the rest, but glad that you are with the awoken. Nicholas Rapp, excellent to see you. Hey, I have a scheduling conflict with the World Cup. No, that's not true. This show has been scheduled since 2008. Actually, the World Cup has a scheduling problem with me, and I blame the Russians. I know it's kind of a thing, but I got to tell you, they will do this to you. They will schedule games, when you're doing your vlog. I mean, just no respect. I'll give you a hint, Mr. Cordychip. It's close. Well, look at the Panamanians. They look happy. I guess just in light of everything else, getting a goal is probably as well as things would go for them. So there we go. Mr. ASDF12131 said Dr. Cuddy, you have no scientific data on this. Wait a minute. Technically, a person can survive 11 days with no sleep. That's horrible. That's horrible. Thank you for the statistic there, that blaming the Russians is a good idea 73% of the time. What I really like about Russia, the two things, of course, you're familiar with the fact that in Japanese, the common sort of meme that, in English we talk about, the Russian reversals, which I love. I mean, any excuse, I'll use a tweet. Normally in normally in countries around the world, people watch soccer, but in Russia, soccer watches you. I love Russian reversals. They're like I think they are the pinnacle of humor. So as well as having that in English, there is actually a Japanese equivalent to this that I think I've mentioned on before. That in Japanese, Russia is not R-U, it's R-O, Russia. And it's kind of funny because in Japanese, if you say osoroshi is the word for terrifying. And if you were to be startled and say, "Oh my God, that's terrifying," rather than saying "osoroshi desu," you'll say "osoroshi ya," which is kind of a Kansai comedian way of screaming, "Oh my God, that's terrifying." And so there's this thing where people will, nobody would say "ya" with a Y, but of course it sounds the same as just saying Russia. So they put an "also" on the front of it, and it sounds like Russia, oh my God, that's terrifying. So with Japan it works as well. Basically every story about Russia, people will always comment by adding an "also" on the front and a hyphen and saying, "Here it goes, also Russia, terrifying country." Lauren Sakai, don't worry, I would not. I would move. Well, I mean, we can see it from our backyards here in Japan, and they're actually not lying about that. In Nemuro, you can actually see, well, they're occupied islands, but you can't actually see them. They're actually very, very close. But yes, it is, of course, it's terrifying. They tried invading Japan a couple of times. Travis Moore, you have not missed the Quake talk. I've been talking about MyChan TV and how terrifying Russia is, and that they're to blame for the scheduling conflict with the Panama-England game that's happening right now. I hope that you are enjoying watching the game while having the soothing sounds of my commentary on completely irrelevant subjects accompanying, which would be better than me trying to call the game. So yes, we have a Russian lecturer who's pretty terrible. Well, there you go. I had a Russian lecturer in New Zealand who, well, actually he was Armenian. He used to be the Soviet ambassador to New Zealand, and he was a very nice man, actually. But in any case, the Korea versus Korea, the C becomes, that's right, that's in order that they come out the gate first. Of course, France spells Korea C-O-R-E-E, or they used to, I don't know if they still do that. And it's one of the, again, it's the little brother syndrome. Well, the little brother syndrome plus being colonized and abused for 50 years, it has a way of making you resentful, in never-ending creative and interesting ways. So of course there is one of the sort of right-wing internet things that Korean, nationalists like to say is that they say that the whole Korea starting with a K is a conspiracy imposed by Japanese colonists while they were occupied in order to make Korea come after Japan during the Olympic opening ceremony. Which sounds, no, it doesn't sound plausible actually, but there we go. Your phone is down to 15%. Plug that thing in, Mr. Cordy Chap. That's what the power plug is for. I will try to speak more softly in order to save your battery. I don't know if that's likely to help. We need to name this whale. What's a good name for a lost whale? That, I mean, this is, I don't know. This is basically, how would I put it? This is Richard Pryor getting lost and somehow stumbling into Mississippi. I mean, this is the unluckiest whale in the world. There is a majestic whale, not clear what type of whale it is, but it has been spotted several times in Tokyo Bay. And all I can say is run, Forrest, run. I mean, I don't think that actually, well, I don't think that they would actually harpoon and eat the thing like they're in the harbor. But there again, if I was going to be advising the whale, I would not be advising that this whale hang around. And by the way, if they're looking for revenge on the whaling crews, they're not in Tokyo Bay. They're they're at Wada, which is down in Wakayama, and they are in Katsura, which is in southern Chiba. It's actually, there is a whaling town nearby which you can go to. It's within like 1.5 hours from from Tokyo. There's a museum and everything there. Remember, of course, we ourselves used to be the biggest whalers, and we're the ones who made them extinct. The Japanese didn't really materially contribute to the extinction, or the endangerment of most whales, but their dedication to their right to continue hunting is, of course, the sore point on this. But in any case, hey, ASDF123, I'm glad you got that. Run, Willie, run. That's a good one, Willie. We're gonna call this one Willie. Release Willie. Let Willie go. Let go of my Willie. I don't know. There's a dangerous line on that name, but certainly Willie had better get the hell out. That's all I can say. What is in Wakayama, I believe. That is also, of course, where they have the cove and the dolphin hunt. But they're actually very aquatic places. Was it Wada or was it Shizuoka? I'm pretty sure it was Wakayama anyway. But yeah. So that is Willie, and Willie had better free himself, or he's going to be in a lot of trouble. Of course, I am anthropomorphizing as a man, but I could be completely wrong about that. So there you go. What else have we got here? So this is kind of interesting. Run, Richard, run. Richard is kind of a bit... Free Richard. Some Monty Python overtones now, as well as other... I can see what you're doing there, Mr. Cordyceps. It's very clever. Kind of disappointing that England didn't score another 5 goals in the second half, but I guess that they're kind of kicking back now. Yeah, Travis Moore, you know about those beaches in Wakayama? They're not actually Wakayama beaches. There are beaches like that in Japan, particularly in Kumamoto, which is famous for them. Okinawa has them, but I don't like the beaches in Okinawa. They look nice. They're white sand. But the coral there is really rough. I mean, the beaches there are jagged. They actually really, the white sand there really hurts your feet. It can cut your feet. You've got better white sand beaches in Miyazaki, Kumamoto Prefecture, and, wait for it, Shizuoka, Shimoda, I think, has some of the best beaches I've seen anywhere in the world. Some of the best surfing and beaches I've ever been to, of course, are in Fukushima Prefecture. I've talked about this before. But those beaches in Wakayama, there were no beaches there. You know what they did? They bought a whole ton of sand from Australia, from Queensland, and they dumped it there in Ohama, or was it Shirahama, in Wakayama. That's an artificial, well, it's a man-made beach out of Australian Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast sand. So yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, and it's awesome. It's a very nice Australian beach. One thing that Australia does very well. I remember when I first showed my Australian friends photos of going to the beach in Chiba, and they asked, "What's that you're standing on?" And I said, "It's sand." And they're like, "Really? It looks kind of brown." I'm like, "Yeah, it's kind of more like dirt." And you weren't there, I know, but it also smelled of fish oil because there was a processing factory right beside the beach. Yeah, it's kind of mud. That was in Chiba. There are nice beaches in Chiba as well. But yes, anyway, on to the story that is being shown at the moment. There was an incident this week at I believe it was also in Kansai somewhere, that there was was it Kyoto? There was a high school basketball game which involved an exchange student from Democratic Republic of Congo. Apparently he didn't like something that an umpire decided, and there's a video of it online. Took exception to it, just walked up and just flattened, just knocked the guy in the jaw, knocked him out on his, flat on his back, actually, this umpire. And frankly, when you're an exchange student from the Democratic Republic of Congo, what are you doing randomly coward punching, umpires in the middle of basketball games? In the story, apparently he lost his shit just for a moment, and it resulted in him knocking out a referee. The referee decided not to press charges, so the police didn't take any action, but of course, the video of it went viral. In addition to, obviously the school should have just suspended him and sent him back, and in the end of the day, he voluntarily quit his exchange and went back. And issued an apology, but apparently what followed, was unfortunately a tirade of racist abuse at the school. And it's one of these things you can sort of superficially, when you see something outrageous and you want to hurt that person in the most obvious and easy way to do it, a lot of people started spewing racism, but you know, again, that just makes these people as bad. I mean, you know, it's like yeah, you know, it's just another horrible thing. So unfortunately, this came out. It is in Kyoto. I would say in defense that Kyoto is just, I mean, they're racist to everybody, including other people from Japan, including people from Kyoto who haven't been in Kyoto long enough. But yeah, kind of unfortunate. I mean, it was outrageous, the video. You can look at it online. It was a big sort of news thing this week, just because the video just captured this thing. I mean, as Team Gaijin, oh, what the fuck? Seriously, don't do that shit, please. I mean, you kind of make us all look bad. It doesn't justify what followed. But in any case, he is going home, and the school has apologized for him knocking over this umpire. Interesting, a lot of stories at the moment talking about how the United States is now becoming slightly alarmed that China, you know, while a lot of companies in America are debating the ethics of AI and whether they should, you know, be able to, how much they should invest in it, whether there should be restrictions on using artificial intelligence and restrictions on the artificial intelligence itself. You know, thinking ahead to what happens when, you know, you start having machines that can kill, that can think for themselves, or they can kill autonomously. What safety mechanisms do you have? Well, in America they're debating this. In Japan, they're not even really getting started properly at it yet. China is like, boom, full speed. They don't care. They're just going for it. It's made some people realize there's a bit of an arms race for knowledge and technology. I mean, there is this thing as well. I mean, militarily, of course, you can have a huge advantage whoever gets to, you know, the highest level of AI first. So, you know, China's racing ahead, and, you know, Japan as well. And the story at the top, there's a Japanese story that's just talking about the realization that there's like a shortage right now. There is demand for AI developers and engineers. 700,000 short at the moment, you know. If you have kids and you want them to learn something that's going to guarantee them a job, machine learning or an AI engineer is a pretty good job at the moment. It's actually related to what I do at the moment, and you know, we're not even started yet. And it is kind of freaky, and it's really hard to predict. You know, you can watch a lot of science fiction and get freaked out, but there is this thing that, you know, Japan's in a really interesting position, and China's in a position where it's really, I think, thinking, well, I don't know if they're thinking long term about the possible negative consequences of AI, but they're certainly thinking ahead in terms of making sure that they don't lose any race associated with it. So that's super interesting at the moment. And Skynet and all that sort of stuff, there is that. But there again, would you rather be dealing with a domestic or a foreign Skynet? And a foreign Skynet, believe me, is possible. You know, so it is interesting. Down the bottom, just a court case this week. If you have a Japanese cell phone, one of the advantages of a Japanese cell phone is that it has 1 seg built in, or a lot of them have 1 seg built in, which is the Japanese standard for terrestrial digital broadcasts for mobile phone. And yeah, to me this is one of the advantages. Also, you know, the latest iPhones have Suica. They have the you know, the contactless payment chip inside that meets the Japanese specifications. The Apple Pay chip, you know, wasn't good enough for Japan. In Japan, you know, the Suica standard, which was developed by the way, game's obviously over now. Congratulations to the team that won. But yes. So there's an interesting thing here. The reason that Japan has a lot of different standards is just because in some ways the technological needs of Japan are different and higher than other countries. So when Apple first started putting contactless payment chips and have Apple Pay in its phones, the thing is you touch it and it takes about 1.5 seconds to go through, which, you know, in most places of the world that weren't used to this sort of technology, that's fine. But in Japan, you know, you need milliseconds, and it's a requirement. Because basically what you've always had is you used to have these amazing train ticket machines that would be able to basically, you could be running through a turnstile, putting the ticket in, and it would pop out the other side, that you could pick it up running through. And this is for stations like Shinjuku Station that have 30-40 million people go through them every day. You know, you can't have everybody stopping for 1.5 seconds to go through these things. You know, you multiply that by 30 million at rush hour. and it just doesn't work. So Japan developed more stringent standards, which foreign chips didn't meet. But so eventually the iPhone caught up, and they incorporated for Japan sold phones the Japanese Suica compatible chip. Well, similarly with OneSeg, OneSeg isn't on iPhones, it is on a lot of Japanese smartphones, and it's a major attraction. If you've got this, you can watch Japanese, digital broadcasts, you can watch Japanese TV on these smartphones. The only problem is that NHK has been going around basically trying to hit up everybody who's got a smartphone with a OneSeg tuner to pay an extra NHK fee. This went to court, and apparently there's now been a court decision on appeal that if you have a smartphone with a OneSeg tuner, you have to pay NHK, a broadcast fee. So yeah, that sucks. I must admit, I like NHK, and I pay the NHK broadcast fee. But most countries, the broadcast fee system is kind of shitty, and the way that they collect is also quite dodgy. So that is what it is. But apparently that case, it's another reason to not have a Japanese smartphone, because in addition to the subscription fees, you'll also have to pay NHK with it. Honestly, if that's the case, the phone companies, I think, should bear the cost. It's just a phone that keeps taking. So yes, look at this. This is actually a really interesting car. I think I've talked about it a couple of times. This is the Toyota Century. I guess a lot of you probably know your Japanese cars, but you might not know the Toyota Century because it's not sold outside of Japan, and there's almost no demand to export it, yet it is actually the #1 luxury brand of Toyota is not the Lexus. It is actually the Century. It's the car that the Emperor drives, that the Prime Minister gets driven around in. There are some sort of market taxi companies that have these, and what it is, it's basically like, it's not a stretch limousine, but it is the Japanese equivalent of a limousine. And what it is it's a handmade 6-liter V12. They only make a certain number of them a year. All the cars are numbered. The design is basically something like the Toyota Crown or the Toyota Corolla from 1970 or something. It's basically like a 40-year-old design. And sorry, I'm just turning on the aircon. The computer gets a little bit hot. I'm sorry if that makes some noise. So yeah, this car is basically, and it's made to be invisible. The reason they make it look like a 1970s Crown is they wanted to make it look like, it's basically like a Corolla. It looks like the most anonymous car in the world, but it's actually a 6-liter V12 handmade Toyota car. They've got really squishy suspension. Apparently, I used to have a taxi driver who would just pick me up at the time. I'd work till 3 o'clock, like regularly in one of my old jobs, and there'd always be a Century at the same spot. Like when I'd go out of the office at 3 o'clock in the morning, I ended up having the same driver a lot of nights, and we ended up talking a lot about the car. And he told me that he'd always been his, as a taxi driver all his life, he'd always wanted to own his own car, and he always wanted it to be a Century. So he got the Century, and I got to drive in the back of one. And I sort of said, how is it to drive? And he said, well, it's got all the power, it's got everything that you want. If you want to get to your meeting at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but the first thing is, it's not really a driver's car. It's made to be comfortable for the person sitting in the back, not the person in the front. But if the person in the back tells the person in the front get there faster or whatever, it'll get them faster. But it's a bit, he says it's not very sharp or responsive or sporty or anything like that. But it's basically the car that if you're a company president and you have a driver, that's the car that you get in. So the big news is that for the first time since 1997, the top Toyota, arguably the top car in Japan, the car that the Emperor would get driven around in, is being updated from looking like, I tweeted the joke, it's being updated for the first time in 21 years, from looking like a 1965 taxi to looking like a 1968 taxi. It's going to be hybrid this time. Yeah, it is actually. It's an interesting car. They say luxury lifestyle, but this is a car that you get with the driver that's standing beside it. You don't drive this car unless, of course, you're a taxi driver and you really want customers that like to feel like they're people being driven around. It's not really it's a really interesting car actually. Yes, I like the Century, and I thought I'd share that. Blue Origin is going to be selling tickets for space flights in 2019. Even better news, apparently they're going to start selling return tickets from 2020. Not sure which one I'll go for. If they're cheaper, I might just go for the 2019 ones. Joke. But yes, I think it's super cool that we are starting to see now. I mean, we've got Virgin Galactic is probably aiming for 2019, more likely 2020. SpaceX is getting there pretty soon. And again, just the pressure, the I mean, literal schlong measuring contest, obviously, that Bezos has with Musk. I'm hoping will prompt that they're going to have like cooler and cooler, like, and cheaper and more accessible like rocket pods and all that sort of stuff. And damn, I want to do that. Hell yeah. I don't know. I reckon for a ticket less than $10,000, it would be a no-brainer that I would sign up for that. I'm guessing that just based on demand alone, even if they could offer it that cheap, they'd probably offer it more than that. I'd be guessing the cheapest, if it's a suborbital flight, if it just gets you up to space and it's like one of those 30-minute things, I think they might charge $10,000 to $20,000. Up to 20, I guess I might wait a little bit. But I tell you what, I mean, my life, this is what I always wanted to do. I mean, obviously, orbit is what you really want to do. I reckon, I don't know, if it becomes possible to go into to orbit, even to spend like a day in 0G, man, that's I'd pay 20 grand for that, I reckon. I really would. I mean, that was always my dream, and the idea that this could actually happen. And indeed, sloppy pastrami, get anywhere on Earth in about an hour. Well, that's right. I mean, so remember, in orbit, at the orbit height of the space shuttle, which is how up, that's about 200 kilometers. I think that the space shuttle orbits at 28,000 kilometers per hour. It takes 90 minutes for an orbit. So theoretically, at orbit speed, you can get anywhere in the world in 45 minutes. You know, given that you only have to go halfway around the planet, you know, it's just which direction you go in. But of course, that said, you need the time to take up and to land. So yeah, about an hour. But you know, I love this. I hope the environmental stuff with it is okay. But yes, I super want to do this. I think this is exciting and cool. And there are a bunch of companies now lining up to start offering these things. So it looks like, I mean, we're on the precipice of, like, within, geez, 3, 4, 5 years of this perhaps being affordable and doable by anyone. Yeah, damn, I'm gonna do that. I don't know about you guys. This is like my life's dream. So yeah, I think that's super cool. Let me do that. Let's see if I can make this quiet. Sorry, give me a sec. I don't want to. Okay, we'll do it that way. So I thought that was very, very cool. I shared that. This AI and technology and stuff, I was just talking about that. So of course, at the moment we have this this period of quasi self-driving cars with that you basically are not fully autonomous, that you need to sit at the steering wheel but can drive themselves. And it does present this really interesting problem when you live in this halfway world, that there are cars there that you know, you need to be concentrating enough to be able to prevent accidents, i.e. you really do need to be as alert and as ready to react as someone who's driving a car directly. And yet the whole idea of self-driving cars is to let you not have to be as alert. And we are finding out that people are doing the natural things that people are going to do in self-driving cars, which is that they are going to watch TV, they're going to go to sleep, they're going to call up friends, they're going to, you know, do anything other than actually focus on the road. Because, you know, in the end of the day, it's not quite there. That halfway house, I mean, we've all been there. I've been there. I'm going to put my hand up. I have been driving at high speed on highways, falling over asleep. It's dangerous and it's horrible, and you know, there are times you pull over and you try to get an energy drink. You should really pull over and just sleep, but you know, you've been out surfing all day, you're sunburned, you're exhausted, and you're sleepy, and you got to get 2 hours drive home. We've all been in these sort of situations where you're just exhausted, but you have to drive, and it is life or death, and you have to focus on the road. And self-driving, on the one hand, is a benefit, you know, is something that takes that burden away, but at the same time, you have to be as alert. We have a case here where, you know, and this is even more unfortunate, not just that it was a self-driving car crash, but the fact that it was an Uber car and it was the driver that was distracted at the time that the car crashed. But to me, here's the thing. I mean, of course, we can all say, well, of course they shouldn't have been watching The Voice while driving. All true. But here's the thing. In the end of the day, as foolish as that was, they died, and there are a lot of people, you know, I mean, there are not a lot of people, but there are a number of people. I mean, any one person dying is enough. That, you know, to me, what this means is that the urgency of realizing fully autonomous self-driving, where you don't need to be at the wheel, and where you can actually just do all those things, go to sleep, watch TV, and, you know, not be at risk of being distracted and having it crash, is really, for me, given that it's a public safety issue, I mean, I'm really hoping that once we get to a point, which I'm also hoping will be on the same sort of timeline as space tourism, i.e. within the next 5 years is what I'm hoping, that we'll start to see this. I think governments should make self-driving cars mandatory. I think you should only be able to, like, manually drive cars under certain circumstances in certain places. Because I think the payoff is that you can actually get rid of all crashes. You know, if they're all cars that can talk to each other, and you'll never have to focus on the road again. You can work, you can sleep, you can do whatever you want. I mean, you know, so I think, I don't know, for me this actually highlights that not just the companies at the moment, of course the company that gets there first with fully autonomous cars, everyone understands this is why Google is getting into it, this is why tech companies are getting into this. It's going to be, again, it's like the AI race, whoever wins is going to be a massive windfall. But you know what, I think now it's actually attached to a safety priority that I think it shouldn't just be companies. I think that governments should actually be providing whatever help necessary to make this, basically, one, to bring this about as soon as possible, and two, to make it as mandatory as possible. Obviously it's not going to work if you're going to have you know, people driving mixed in with autonomous cars. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with that, if they're going to have separate roads or whatever. But again, I think from a public safety perspective, I think you should just turn cars into trains. You know, I live in Japan, so it's easy to think of that, and that's a you don't want to own a Chevy Camaro and have it drive yourself. And we'll have to figure out what to do with those vintage car drivers. There might be racetracks, or, you know, there might be certain permits or rules around how they drive, whatever. But again, you think about it from a macro situation, it's entirely likely and probable that cars are all going to be tracked, that they're all going to be able to, police cars are going to be able to get cars out of the way in chases and stop cars and whatever. But yeah, I don't know. At the very minimum, you know, fully autonomous cars is something that we're still a long way away from. This AI race means that China might get there first. China might start producing these cars before everybody else. But it would be a good thing if they did. So, you know, it's an interesting subject, and we have, you know, and I really think that this actually highlights an issue. We can all, that's not with the driver in this case. It's easy to blame the driver, but I think it actually highlights the issue that we need to fix this, get this technology up as soon as possible. Yes. Oh, you know what? This is the wrong account to perhaps retweet, but yes, indeed, Mr. O'Shea in Japan, who, oh god, Busan Kevin got locked out of his Twitter account, so now his Twitter account is Mad for Maple. Update, follow if you already followed the Just Japan Twitter handle. He's lost it, so search for Mad for Maple and go and support Busan Kevin. He's still producing a lot of great content. He's another OG. He's been around basically about the same time as me, yeah, he's a good guy to follow. But give him some support. He's had some trouble there with Twitter, so do that. Boom. Let's get back to the stories. This is cool. This is, I think, happening this week. I might be wrong about this. I believe it's 3 days to go. So Hayabusa 1, a Japanese satellite, was actually the first ever satellite to actually make contact with the surface of an asteroid. Was the Hayabusa 1 probe, and it actually, or it was actually a comet, I believe, and it actually like had a pogo stick, where it pogoed down onto the onto a comet, and it took a sample from the surface and it brought it back to Earth. Had a terrible, disastrous, flaming crash, but they found that even after the crash, that the sample that was collected was still present inside the container, and it was the first time that we've ever actually directly been able to sample a comet. Hayabusa 2 was so successful, not completely, but mostly successful. Hayabusa 2, another Japanese probe, is now out there coming up to asteroid Ryugu, which is a really small asteroid, but they've actually, they're now up close enough that they're about to start the long trip to the surface. It's a funny looking asteroid, as you can see. GeekWire thinks it looks like the Borg cube, but yeah, I think it's really, really cool. And that's well, Sergeant Booker, that's part of the risk. The design is that it pogo sticked. It didn't like stay put on the surface, but it did go on. As it bounced, it took the sample and then it bounced back up again. But you're right, you want to be very careful how you pogo when it's in outer space, especially when you're landing like on a 10-kilometer rock, like millions of kilometers away. It's kind of mind-boggling actually that they could even navigate to this thing. Let alone if they're able to actually complete the mission, I believe in 3 days from now, of pogo sticking on it and returning to Earth with the pogo stick dirt from the rubber bit on the bottom. So super, super cool. They're still trying to track it, are they? Well, there we go. But yeah, really, really cool. And another cool thing that Japan is doing on the self-driving car thing, again, this is in Japan. Japan is a real problem at the moment, apart from the ongoing historical problem of crystal meth abuse. So, crystal meth being, of course, amphetamine abuse by truck drivers and bus drivers, just because Japan, the entire economy is based on logistics. It's based on moving of goods domestically in Japan, and Japan is a fantastic highway system that was made for this purpose. But the problem is that there's less and less people to do those jobs. There's a huge job shortage in drivers, both for trucks and buses, and this means that companies are constantly under pressure to extend, to basically overwork the drivers. Some companies will be good and they'll have audits showing that they're ensuring that their drivers get sufficient sleep and whatnot, but most aren't. And although it's a job where you can get reasonable money, it's a job where, how many crashes do we see on the news in Japan from drivers falling asleep at the wheel from what it turns out to be overwork? They are importing foreign drivers, but there again, of course, it's not, not entirely easy, but there is that. But again, what a lot of companies are now looking for is at least internet connected trucks, which makes sense as well. You want to track your network. You want to actually know where the cargo is and if there's any issues with it and so on. But again, moving towards the idea that these trucks are going to be automated. Fully automatic is, again, it's a great way to save fuel. You can actually have more predictable arrival times and so on. Why not drag all the shut-ins out and make them work? Well, that's another idea. Well, perhaps, if they're all going to be internet connected, perhaps you'll be able to drive these things with a PlayStation console. I mean, that way the shut-ins don't even have to leave home and they can drive the trucks. In fact, that's actually, as I say it out loud, that's an astoundingly good idea. I should patent that right now. Well, that's a win-win, isn't it, if you get the shut-ins to actually make it like a video game type system where people can actually drive these from home. I mean, I think that's where we are going. Bilko for Prime Minister, indeed, come to Japan and save us. Self-driving cars can't see cyclists reliably though, says Chris. Good point, good point. Well, I mean, yes and no. When you get the system right, the whole point at the moment is that, one, there are no fully autonomous cars. I mean, there are just none that meet that standard. And the tests that they do, including, well, Lempa, that's a point. But there again, this is the whole idea of, I think, making these things connected and basically supervised. I mean, what you're talking about could be the same actually. Oh, I just realized something. There we go. I've got the cursor on here. I'll put this on show because it's a legitimate comment. Two things on the cyclists. Yeah. I mean, this is another part of the whole puzzle that has to be fixed. Done right. I mean, these cars are going to have sensors and cameras all over them that are actually probably going to detect cyclists more reliably than cars. I mean, you think about the blind spots and just the sheer arseholes that drive cars. That just dislike cyclists and go out of their way to, bump them and do stuff like that all the time. I think ultimately done right, automated driving will be good for cyclists. Although, of course, cyclists themselves are going to have to be careful, themselves with the cars. But certainly I'd like to think that, I mean, this is how you've got to build the cars to be safe for that sort of thing. And in terms of, you're right, what about a shut-in that decides that they're just going to weaponize the car? Well, again, you got to foresee these problems. If you've foreseen it, I hope that other people do. And yeah, Travis Moore, just hire the ones who are into truck simulators. Well, indeed. I mean, this is the thing. It's a thing, right? Truck simulators. Tell them they're doing it for real and pay them as truck drivers where they can do it comfortably from home. Don't pick the ones that are playing the Russian version. Good advice there, Sergeant Bilko. In the Russian version, it's actually, you know, that the cars actually drive you. That's right. That's right. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying. You've seen them on Twitch. Well, so why not? I mean, I think that's actually an awesome solution. I mean, this is the world that we're going into. Bus driving, truck driving. You don't have to actually be in the bus anymore. So super interesting anyway. We didn't even get to the earthquake yet. That was a sunset that I saw the other day. I took a photo. It was very nice. It's very nice. Summer in Tokyo, you actually get awesome sunsets. It's currently rainy season, by the way. When it finishes, you'll get the better sunsets, but that was still pretty good. And we are now getting towards the start of the week and the Osaka earthquake. So there was a Shindo lower 6. Shindo lower 6, so again on the Shindo scale. One is you might notice, but you might not even know, even if you're paying close attention. 2, if you're sitting down, you're paying attention, oh, there's a tremor, but if you're walking, you probably wouldn't notice. 3 is a tremor that you'd notice even if you're sort of walking. You go, oh, it's a tremor. Not really scary, but you notice that, you know, is that a truck going by or a tremor? 4 is a whoa, like when it starts to make noise. And when you start to worry, is this going to get bigger? 4 was where it starts to get scary. This is a shaking scale. It's not a magnitude scale. Magnitude just measures the energy released by the quake. Shindo measures how much something shakes in a particular place. So it's like a rainfall map or like a temperature map. It actually shows how much actual shaking happens. This is what we don't have in the West. 4 is when it starts to get scary, but generally 4 doesn't cause any damage, but it starts to cause, you know, trousers to need to be changed and that sort of thing. Then you've got your lower 5 and upper 5. Lower 5 is where damage is possible, like things falling off shelves and so on. Upper 5 is where things will fall off shelves and possibly really badly made buildings might suffer minor damage. But generally you'll start to get superficial damage and some damage on older buildings at upper 5. At lower 6, you'll start to get proper building damage. Usually, particularly older buildings may get knocked down. Upper 6, you'll get even well-built buildings will start to get structural damage, and 7, you know, is basically off the scale, and that's what we had in Miyagi during the Great East Japan earthquake. This was a lower 6. So when you heard this, you know, as a magnitude, it was a 5.9, but it was quite shallow, so it did have a very strong shake in northern Osaka. And it killed 5 people, injured a few hundred people, it stopped all the trains, it did cause significant disruption. And you had the situation that we had in Tokyo happen right in the middle of rush hour, so people didn't know, do they keep going to work, do they go home, how do they get home, the trains all stopped running, so what do people do? I had this, I knew people in Tokyo. It was an upper 5 in Tokyo, so it was less than this Osaka earthquake when we had the Great East Japan earthquake, which was in itself sufficient to shut down all the trains in Tokyo. But of course you still had this problem. You got a city of 3 million people, like Osaka, the 3rd biggest city in Japan, not the 2nd. They always say that they're the number 2 city, but they're not. It's actually Yokohama is the number 2 city, but to everyone else in Japan, Yokohama is like a suburb of Tokyo. But yeah, so Osaka's there, 3 million people. Everyone's sort of stranded, and of course you're gonna have bosses like these guys who would tell people come into work, you know, come into work regardless, or we're gonna dock your pay. You know, when there's a freaking earthquake and you go home and check your family and your kids and stuff like that. Besides which, the reason I posted this story was actually more the survey that this idea that Japanese are like, you know, kamikaze fighter pilots ready to sacrifice everything for their companies, and that's why they work to death. That's not it. That's not why they work to death. Very important to actually point this out. Japanese are not loyal to their bosses. As hierarchical as Japan seems, I'd say Japan is in many ways more egalitarian than it is hierarchical. Hierarchy is built into the language, but it doesn't necessarily come along with the same respect and obeying. You know, there are just some companies here where people started tweeting, and this is, again, the great thing about this age, which is maybe different to the past. People now, whenever they see something weird, they can tweet it. And generally the younger people, at least, who are on social networks that see this can validate, oh yeah, that's bullshit. And it means that actually, as I've said before, you know, I don't like to talk about millennials or Generation X or baby boomers or generational stuff. I think it's just a marketing, you know, piece of bullshit. But to the extent that there is a shift where workers are much more willing to to basically quit jobs and change jobs and do different types of jobs till when I first got in Japan. I think it's a positive trend that you have that, and people can call bullshit, but when you have those people working with people who came from an age where you always put up with whatever shit the company gave you, no matter what, you end up with a situation where, according to the survey of 1,006 men and women ranging from 20 to 69 were asked, 27% said that they felt stirrings of homicidal urges. Have you ever wanted to kill your boss? 27% of these 1,000 Japanese people said, yeah, I've thought about it, and I'm sure that they probably weren't even that there wasn't much of a joke in there. So yes, this is another challenge when you've got this kind of Showa period bosses with you know, for probably the most not taking bullshit generation Japan's ever had coming through at the moment. You know, where there aren't sufficient there's insufficient employees to meet all the jobs. The social contract where companies are going to look after employees is now gone, so they don't. They know that not to expect that, and they know not to show companies respect because they don't get respect back. And yeah, they don't put up with the shit of these managers who kind of think of you know, companies as like an Amish commune that there's no escape from. So there you go, 27%. That's an alarmingly high number, and it was kind of the reasons behind it were brought out, and some of the reactions that are tweeted in reaction to the Osaka earthquake. Another unfortunate aspect of the Osaka earthquake, and this happened in Tokyo as well, kind of internet rumors, gossip, and so on. A lot of people started saying things like foreigners are coming in and hoarding food or hoarding or stealing food from convenience stores and so on, trying to trigger panic, basically playing on people's fears, but identifying specifically foreigners as going on burglary sprees and so on. This was a big problem after the Kobe earthquake as well. There was a lot of sort of racist rumors going around. The thing with Kobe, that was also pre-internet. But you know, even Fukushima, everything else, when people, you know, when you find out that there've been a bunch of burglaries up in Fukushima, people say, oh yeah, that was Chinese, you know, immigrants who did it. It could be anybody who did it, but it's probably, when you're dealing with very tight sort of communities, you remember these are people, they can drive from anywhere in Japan and go and do this, but it seems more comfortable to believe that it's foreigners, and you get these rumors. And the precedent for this is the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake in Japan, where these sorts of rumors that, you know, there were rumors that Korean people in particular, also Chinese people, were poisoning wells or something after that earthquake that got around, and these were the justification for a mob that went around and started massacring foreigners. I mean, finding them wherever they were in families and basically mob killing them. And this was you know, this was during the period where Korea was part of Japan. You know, where Japan, at least whether the Koreans accepted it or not, Japan treated Korea as part of Japan during that period, or considered Korea part of itself. So these were Japanese people of ethnic, you know, of Korean race, that were living in Japan, and they got rounded up and massacred, which I guess, you know, this is part of the reason when you talk about why there's so much mistrust still of Japan. It's the tendency to break out and do this kind of thing. The Japan that I see, I do not identify with the World War II stories that I read before coming to Japan, but you know, like any country in the world, I mean, look at America right now. I'm not going to get into the America stuff, but it shows. I mean, communities can switch. You know, it's not deep below the surface that communities can switch to being afraid and turning on others in the worst way possible. And you know, there were no massacres or anything in Osaka, thank heavens, but this is how it starts, right? You know, you're in a situation where you feel insecure, and you start to, you know, link up with other people by identifying external threats. And this is what people, even, you know, in this day and age, there was a lot of media coverage to tell people to stop spreading, you know, fake rumors and stuff like that, and racist rumors and hate speech and so on. But it happened. It's something to bear in mind. Again, we're in Tokyo. We had a similar size quake. Similar sort of rumors happened, but not on this sort of a scale. I would like to think that Tokyo is a lot safer from this sort of thing, but there you go. Why did I put this there? I think this was a thing talking about, probably that was unintentional, but this is something that I found on making music on iPhones that I thought was pretty cool. This was a big topic. Apparently, you know, again, knowing that earthquakes are like a certain thing anywhere in Japan, that they're certain to happen, there are building codes that designate that even the building of like heavy walls like that, that they can't be above a certain height where there is a risk of that happening. That happened, and a 9-year-old girl walking to school was killed. So they actually did a survey. Now all over the country, it's like everyone knows what a block bay is at the moment. Bay is a Japanese suffix for these block-based sort of walls and how high they're allowed to be. And they found a whole bunch of them, typically around schools and so on as well. So they're all currently being knocked down. Unfortunately, these things get caught only after something like this happens a lot of the time, but they were constructed illegally in the first place. They didn't meet building codes. And in the case of this one where a girl was killed, it seems that the school board around the school that built it and the local city council knew about it and looked past it when this was built. So unfortunate, but there you go. That's been a big thing this week, that people are going around finding that. I just explained the Shindo scale before, but again, it's worth reminding because it really is something I think every country should have. Even if you don't have frequent earthquakes, it's good to understand these things. I mean, in Japan, of course, we experience earthquakes, I think possibly more than any other country of any substantial size. Yeah, it is like we're reporting the weather. It's like a temperature map or whatever, but it's also, the science and for understanding when people, whenever we get earthquakes in New Zealand quite a lot, but whenever I read earthquake news about New Zealand, they can only describe anecdotally what happened. Like, my cat was disturbed, or, there was a big rattling or whatever. I mean, you can't really, so the Shindo scale is awesome and you should have it. That is the show from last week, but there were a couple of things before this. So this is people actually reacting to the alerts from the Osaka quake. That is Chilling Kansai being scared as is happening. That is a train platform sign that right at the peak Ibarakishi in Osaka, that where the thing actually broke and fell. Universal Studios Japan windows broke. I mean, it was a scary thing. When I went to Seattle the other week, I did take this. I posted it on Instagram. This is kind of cool. That is a Neon Camera is the app. It's a Japanese app. And will it play? Boom. I thought this was kind of cool. This is like taking off. Oh, it's kind of full screen, but it's not playing properly. So I guess Instagram's plans that it has to be a YouTube competitor based on vertical video are probably not going to work very well if they can't get the damn videos to play. Let's try this one more time. That's kind of cool anyway. I love the Tron effect of this, the old 1980s video game effect. So I do like this app, and I did. Oh, there we go. Boom. So this was, I just pointed this out the window when I left Narita. They don't really get in trouble for using your iPhone anymore. In America, you can actually now use phones all the way through. But yes, vertical video syndrome. Well, I don't know. Again, I remember when first had the idea of people posting vertical videos on YouTube and people saying, don't do that. But, now it's actually, particularly for formats like Snapchat and Instagram, it seems to be the way a lot of people do it. And I kind of get, you want it to be full screen. If you're looking at primarily on mobile rather than computer, it makes sense. Although, yeah, but I thought it was kind of cool. It was raining at the time, so it's like that's actually cloud that's making that disappear. But it still looks really, really cool how you get that outline. I do love this app. So, showing off. Boom, boom, boom. What else have we got? That's about it, I think. The birth rate is down. All this other stuff is actually from previous weeks, so that's really it. It is 23:37, 27. So we're 4 minutes away from the end of the show. Ask me anything. I'm looking at the comments right now. There's not enough time to make a track, although the last track I made I thought myself was actually quite good. Looking forward to half an hour's time to watching Japan play Senegal, and this could be the game that will put Japan, boom, through until the next round of the World Cup, which would be super exciting. Although if at the moment, the way I think the math would work out, I think presuming that they would come second in the group, is that they'd have to play Belgium, and Belgium looked like crazy good yesterday. So that would be that'd be interesting. But there again, here's the thing: you probably don't want to play the stronger countries. You want to have a longer run, but at the same time, at the end of the day, if your aim is to win, you got to play the top countries. So it'll be interesting to see. 2 wins will put you through, indeed. So yes, do a lot of Japanese businessmen own a Docomo flip phone, or is that an unfounded stereotype? You really want a nice Docomo phone? They're so cool. Yes, it's still quite common for companies, particularly companies that have contracts with Docomo, that they all have the old-fashioned feature phone. The garake is what they're called in Japanese. And where you see them, yeah, it still is more often the flip phones exist, and where I see them, they're almost always business guys. Usually there's a second phone, like a work dedicated phone, like they'll have their personal phone, that'll be an iPhone, and there'll be a work phone where the company will just be really stingy and probably doing some company a favor with a circular transaction of just buying this stock. So you do still see them, and where I see them, it's almost always salary men. I think you sometimes see women who just like them and they just keep the old ones, but yeah. Steve from Berkeley, I know you must have said this before, but where does the name Hiko Simon come from or refer to? Well, that's an interesting one. When I first got to Japan, I used to, in fact, 1999, so the internet was new, and when I was trying to pick out a kanji for my name, it just came up based on various combinations of kanji that I was playing around with for fun that people suggested. Hikozaimon. They said it sounds kind of cool. It's a bit like Lancelot. It's the name of, it's sort of an Edo Jidai kind of a samurai name, and it kind of worked for what I was trying to put it together. And it was from that on various forums I was using Hikozaimon with a Z, which is the correct spelling. Actually, not Hikozaimon with an S. Yeah, I used that for a time in the late 90s, around 2000, early 2000s or whatever. A lot of people got to know me as Hiko then, and whenever I met people, even like when I'd use my real name, I liked being called Hiko. It got to be people who knew me very well through what I shared and what I talked about with people on the internet. Got to know me as Hiko, so I got very comfortable with that. And when I went to register on YouTube, I wanted to get the name Hikozaimon, and it was taken by somebody who doesn't even use their channel, which was super annoying. I didn't want to do like Hikozaimon 123 or something, so I figured that you could read it with an S, so I changed it to S, and that's how I got that name. And it refers to, there is a historical character called Okubo Hikozaimon, who was an advisor, I think, to Tokugawa Ieyasu, one of the shoguns of Japan. And yeah, I think there are like TV shows about him. He's like a cultural advisor and judge, So to the extent that, he seems like a kind of a cool kind of, like a knowledgeable samurai, which, I don't know, I kind of like that. So I took it. What can I say? That's how that goes. Believe in yourself. You are most welcome for the time. I have nothing better to do. And it's actually nice to do this. It's nice to have this routine, and I really appreciate you guys coming and joining me every week. You're in Takatsuki, where the epicenter was, just for a few weeks before. Well, glad that you were okay there, Travis Moore. What's happening? What is a flip phone? Indeed, says Mr. Cordy Chep, although I know that you are not that young. You were born in 1999. Well, you've been partying ever since. It's sad that I know that I can make that joke. I must admit, there is this other thing. I did like Stranger Things, and a lot of people did like Stranger Things, but here's the thing. I remember in the 80s, I think it was during the 80s, that they had The Wonder Years on TV. And The Wonder Years is a nostalgic show for baby boomers, basically, about a kid growing up in the 60s in a very well reproduced 1960s world for everyone in the 1980s to watch. And I'll get into the generation thing for a minute. Generation X is tough. We've grown up, outnumbered and being totally dominated by baby boomers. We've kind of in the sort of gap in between impactful generations. And I remember, just hearing so many times baby boomers complaining about how 1980s music sucks and how the only real good music was from the 60s, and 70s and 80s is just vacuous, empty culture. People don't really believe in things like people did in the 60s, and we just heard all this, drug-fueled hippie bullshit just our entire time. This is why we all became conservative, because we just got annoyed. And baby boomers, I think, in time proved themselves to be hypocrites as well. But this whole thing, people thought that people were making the Wonder Years because people from the 80s thought that the 60s was so awesome, and maybe some people did. But to me, this is just old people ramming their old shit down our throats. That's what I thought about it, and I refused in principle to watch the Wonder Years. Now, I enjoy Stranger Things. It's nostalgia for the 80s and 90s. But there again, I'm really mindful. I don't want to be to millennials like baby boomers were to us. So, I mean, for me, I don't know why people would find the 80s interesting. I mean, it has its merits. There are a lot of good movies and so on. I mean, for me, but this is what I associate with my growing up, so it's natural I would think of it that way. To me, I think the new culture that's coming out, generations should focus on making, their time their own and doing their own cool new shit, which is what I'm seeing right now and I love. So, you know, at the same time as I enjoy nostalgia, I don't pretend that it's for anyone other than me. I'm always happy if people like it. But so there we go. I'll make Prince references and so on and allow me to do that. But you know, as you can see, I love to focus on stuff that's ahead of what's happening now rather than behind. That's just my general outlook. Flip phone Galapagos technology. In fact, that's right. That's what Garake is from. It's from Galapagos, isn't it? The Shadow generation. I mean, the whole thing that Gen X was just an invented marketing term just for grouping us and identifying us as a target demographic that they made all those Mountain Dew ads for. Again, I've got an extremely cynical view of this. I know it's used for more broad purposes right now, but the way that I see people talking just complete horse shit about, you know, millennials. I mean, it's a cool kind of a catchphrase for everything. But, you know, people are just people. I mean, crap. But anyway, take the good, leave the bad. Why not? There were, hell yes. Well, here's the thing. I liked 80s music. I liked techno. I liked, you know, new stuff. And dealing with old people saying that that's bullshit. Listen to this 1960s stuff. Are you kidding? I mean, you know, 1960s had good music too. But there you go. I had an Apple IIe as well. Thank you very much. I wasn't allowed a Commodore 64. I got an Apple IIe in 1990. I think my dad got conned. To tell you the truth, he spent a lot of money on it too. The IIe is a 1972 computer. It flies the space shuttle. That sounds cool when you say it flies the space shuttle, but the space shuttle is a 1972 airplane. So there you go. We are now up on the hour. Is there any old music that I like? Lots of old music for karaoke. And there's another thing as well. I mellowed out a lot. I think you hit about 35 and you start really giving a shit about identifying yourself with music. And all of a sudden I started listening to a lot of metal. I started listening to a lot of, you know, I started appreciating my dad's country music a little bit more. And now when I go to karaoke, half the stuff I sing is 60s music, and there's good music. No, so I'm all cool with it. But I remember I was just kind of like, don't force your music on me. I was very big about that, as I think anybody is when they're 23 and insecure, you know, which I never thought I was insecure at the time, but I look back and, oh yeah, I was insecure. I think we're programmed like that. Anyway, Lauren Sakai, it's good to see you all. I hope you all have a very good week. We'll be back next week. Go Japan. Best of luck to Senegal as well, of course, but, you know, hope Japan wins. And I hope you keep enjoying the World Cup. And remember, follow me on Facebook and Twitter. And mychantv.com. It's there. Boom. Check it out. We are doing bug things. Look out for updates on this, because there's going to be some big updates. We're going to hopefully get the thing cleaned up this week. It's a really cool site. If you want to watch YouTube, if you want to keep up with your subscriptions, it is the best thing out there. I mean, it is. I made it because no one was making it. It's really cool. So do that, and I will see you all later, including you, sloppy pastrami. And, you know, I think Marilyn Manson's oldies now. I mean, classic hits. Who knows? See you later. Have a good show. Have a good week, everybody. Boom. Peace.